Osama bin Laden. Now, that's a name that pretty much defined an entire era, right? But beyond the headlines and all the infamy, there's a documented history of radicalization, global conflict, and a manhunt that spanned a decade. Okay, so we're going to dive into the facts presented in the source material to really understand the man behind the myth.
But before we trace his path, we have to start right here with this number: 2,977. That's how many people were killed in the September 11th attacks. To even begin to understand the man, we first have to acknowledge the unbelievable human cost of the violence he set in motion.
So, how did it all begin? Where did this guy come from? Our first section here is going to look at his origins and the journey that took him from a really privileged life in Saudi Arabia all the way to the front lines of a brutal war in a foreign country.
So his story kicks off in 1957. He was born into this incredibly wealthy and influential family in Riyadh. But his life took a hard turn in 1979. That's when he traveled to Afghanistan, right after the Soviet invasion. And that experience, fighting in the mountains of Afghanistan, well, that's what directly led to him co-founding al-Qaeda just 9 years later in 1988.
Okay, but that makes you wonder, right? What would possibly motivate a wealthy guy from Saudi Arabia to just up and join a brutal war thousands of miles away from his home? Well, according to the source material, the answer really boils down to this one concept: defensive jihad. He and the other foreign fighters, they framed the fight against the Soviets not as an act of aggression, but as a religious duty, a duty to defend fellow Muslims. And this idea, it wasn't just a justification for them. It became this incredibly powerful recruiting tool that pulled in fighters from all over. But here's the thing. The fight in Afghanistan, that was never the end game. No, that was just the training ground. The network they built there was about to take its ambitions from a local conflict and go global. Now, this part of the story is actually fascinating. From 91 to 96, he was based in Sudan. And he wasn't just, hiding out. He was basically an entrepreneur of terror. He built up this whole portfolio of businesses and charities that, sources say, had a dual purpose. On the one hand, they looked totally legitimate, but on the other, they were secretly funding and building the entire logistical backbone for his global network. And once that foundation was solid, the 1990s saw a really clear and, frankly, terrifying escalation. It started with smaller attacks, but they got bigger and bolder. You had the U.S. embassy bombings in '98 that killed over 200 people. Then, in 2000, the bombing of the USS Cole. Every single one of these attacks was like a signal of al-Qaeda's growing power and its absolute focus on American targets. And all of this entire decade of violence, it was all building up to one singular event, the one that would burn his name into the minds of everyone on the planet and become the absolute centerpiece of his war against America. 19. That was it. That's the number of al-Qaeda hijackers who, on a single perfectly clear morning, would completely change the course of the 21st century. So on that morning, September 11th, 2001, these hijackers pull off 4 coordinated attacks. 2 planes smash into the World Trade Center in New York, a third hits the Pentagon, and the 4th crashes in a field in Pennsylvania after the passengers heroically fought back. The human toll was just staggering. And the most crucial takeaway is this: the immediate fallout from 9/11 was the beginning of the US-led global war on terror, a conflict that would stretch across the entire planet and completely redefine American foreign policy for decades. And just like that, overnight, Osama bin Laden became the most wanted man on Earth. This kicked off one of the biggest, longest, and most intense manhunts in all of history. For an entire decade, he was a ghost. Intelligence reports suggested he was moving back and forth between the remote, rugged areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan. But as this quote from our source material makes clear, he was anything but retired. Al-Qaeda was still very much active, planning and inspiring attacks around the globe with him as its symbolic leader. So check out this chart. It really puts the timeline into perspective. He was on the run for nearly 10 years. And the crazy part? Intelligence assessments suggest he spent the last 5, maybe 6 years of that time holed up in one single fortified compound in a place called Abbottabad, Pakistan. That 10-year search finally came to a very dramatic end on May 2nd, 2011. In a nighttime raid, codenamed Operation Neptune Spear, U.S. Navy SEALs stormed that compound and killed Osama bin Laden. And just like that, a massive chapter in the war on terror was closed. But his death didn't mean the story was over, not by a long shot. So in this last section, let's tackle some of the biggest myths and theories that still swirl around his life and his death, and we'll compare them directly to the documented facts from our source material. All right, let's start with the big one, the theory you've probably heard a million times, that the CIA basically created bin Laden. Okay, here are the documented facts. The US did funnel a ton of money and weapons to the Afghan Mujahideen groups who were fighting the Soviets. That's a fact. But, and this is key, sources confirm bin Laden was operating his own separate network with his own money. The crucial distinction is that there's no confirmed evidence the CIA ever gave a single dollar directly to bin Laden himself. Next up, the raid itself. This is still a huge point of controversy. Did Pakistan know it was happening? Well, on one hand, the official US account is crystal clear. It was a unilateral operation, meaning they went in alone and told Pakistan after the fact. But on the other hand, there are all sorts of conflicting reports and claims out there that suggest some level of Pakistani knowledge or even cooperation. It's still a really contested issue. And that brings us to the last big question. How on earth did he avoid getting caught for almost a decade? Well, according to intelligence reviews, it really boils down to three main things. First, he was incredibly careful. His own operational tradecraft was very good. Second, he had a super loyal support network keeping him hidden. And third, there were just some major gaps in intelligence that made him almost impossible to track. So look, when you strip away all the theories and all the noise, these are the cold, hard facts, the undisputed pillars of his story. From his birth in '57 to founding al-Qaeda in '88 to the attacks that defined a decade, and finally his death in 2011. This is the documented timeline. And that really leaves us with one last thought, doesn't it? The man is gone, but his legacy is woven into the very fabric of our world today. I mean, think about airport security, government surveillance, the endless conflicts, and the political divisions that came after. His story didn't end in 2011. So the real question isn't just about his story. It's about ours. How are we, right now, today, still living in the world he had such a hand in creating?